morning, everyone. Now we're talking about science. What is science? What is the two classification of science? Science is a systematic and logical approach to discovering how things in the universe work. It is also the body of knowledge accumulated through the discoveries about all the things in the universe. What is science? Science is both a body of knowledge and a process. Science is a global human endeavor. People all over the world participate in the process of science, and you can too. Science is exciting. Science is a way of discovering what's in the universe and how those things work today, how they work in the past, and how they are likely to work in the future. Scientists are motivated by the thrill of seeing or figuring out something that no one has before. Science is useful. The knowledge generated by science is powerful and reliable. It can be used to develop new technologies, treat diseases, and deal with many other sorts of problems. Science is ongoing. Science is continually refining and expanding our knowledge of the universe. And as it does, it leads to new questions for future investigation, so science will never be finished. Lahat ng mga bagay na ating makikita sa ating paligid, it's all about science. Halimbawa lamang nito ang mga gadgets na ating ginagamit like cellphone, laptops, and tablets. For agriculture, we have harvester. It's all about science. So, without science, what would happen in this world? It's so boring. So science is very important in our life because science is a knowledge. Now, let's proceed to the two classification of science. Classification or taxonomy is a system of categorizing living things. Taxonomy, which literally means arrangement law, is the science of classifying organisms to construct internationally shared classification systems with each organism placed into more and more inclusive groupings. Think about how a grocery store is organized. One large space is divided into departments, such as produce, dairy, and meats. Then each department further divides into aisles, then each aisle into categories and brands, and then finally a single product. This organization from larger to smaller, more specific categories is called a hierarchical system. Based on my research, we have 7 classification of science. First, the kingdom, phylum or division, 3 class, 4 order, 5 family, 6 genus, and 7 species. So, we got 2 classification, the kingdom and the species. When we say kingdom, in biology, a kingdom or Latin regnum, plural regna, is the second highest taxonomic rank just below domain. Kingdoms are divided into smaller groups called phyla. For example, domain Eukaryota, kingdoms Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, Protista, Archaea, Archaea, Bacteria, Bacteria. So let's proceed to species. In biological, species is a group of organisms that can be reproduced with one another and nature and produce fertile offspring. Other ways of defining species include their karyotype, DNA, sequence, morphology, behavior, or ecological Nike. As you can see in the picture shows is an example of species. Example 1 is the spider. This happy-faced spider look different, but since they can interbred, they are considered the same species. The second picture shows the bird. The carrion crow, hooded crow, then hybrids. Also many plants and some animals from hybrids in nature. Hooded crows and carrion crows look different and largely mate within their own groups, but in some areas they hybridize. So, should they be considered the same species or separate species? This is considered as species because it is the bird. Thank you for listening. Take care and God bless. Dominic P. Abian reporting.
Good morning. My topic is about the origins of sociology and anthropology. What is sociology? Sociology was derived from both Latin and Greek words. Its Latin word is socius, which means companion, and the suffix from Greek word logi means the study of. This was used by a Frenchman, Auguste Comte, in 1830s. Sociology was coined by a French, Emmanuel Joseph, in 1780 in an unpublished manuscript. There are 8 major thinkers there: Auguste Comte, Harriet Martineau, Herbert Spencer, Karl Marx, Emily Durkheim, and Max Weber. The word sociology will be discussed later by my groupmate with deeper meaning. The origins of sociology. According to sociologists, our social environment has an impact on our thoughts and actions. The social sciences, for example, arose in response to social shifts. Europeans were traveling the world in the 16th and 17th centuries, and voyagers returned with fantastic descriptions of other communities and civilizations from Asia, the Americas, Africa, and the South Seas. The idea that European life mirrored God's natural order was challenged by a wide range of social actions. Technical, economic, and social revolution shook Western Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, irrevocably altering the social order. Science and technology are rapidly evolving. In 1769, James Watt built the steam engine, and in 1865, Joseph Lister learned how to prevent infection by placing an antiseptic barrier between a wound and germs in the air. These and other scientific breakthroughs sparked societal transformation and provided optimism that scientific methods could be used to understand both the social and natural worlds. This development was part of a broader rise in rationalism. In the late 18th century, Britain saw the start of the Industrial Revolution. The old order was failing by the late 19th century under the twin shocks of industrialism and revolutionary democracy. Thousands of people were traveling to the cities to work in the new factories as the mechanical industry grew. People who were once entrenched in the land and social communities where they cultivated were pushed into cities. Impersonal factories and city life were weakening the church, villages, and families' traditional authority. What is anthropology? Anthropology derived from the word anthros, which means human, and logos means study of. Anthropology means study of human. Franz Boas, the father of modern anthropology and the father of American anthropology. He was the first to apply the scientific method of anthropology, emphasizing a research-first methods of generating theories. The origins of anthropology. Anthropology has represented our changing ties with other individuals and civilizations throughout history. These connections are intricately linked to the political, economic, and social factors that have shaped history. History was a vital part of ancient Greek and Roman cultures, which emphasized the use of reason and inquiry to comprehend and construct good societies. During the 5th century BCE, Herodotus, a Greek historian, journeyed to countries as widely apart of modern day Libya, Ukraine, Egypt, and Syria to learn about the beginnings of the Greek-Persian struggle. In addition to historical accounts, Herodotus defined the customs and social structures of the people he met. These meticulous observations are regarded as one of the world's first ethnographic studies. Many academics believe that contemporary anthropology arose during the Age of Enlightenment, an 18th century European cultural movement that emphasized the power of reason to promote society and knowledge. Scholars of the Enlightenment sought to understand human behavior and society as phenomena that followed well-defined rules. Today considered as a social science, and many aspects cross over into other social science disciplines such as psychology, history, sociology, philosophy, and etc.
Good morning to each and everyone. This is the continuation of our report. Our report is talk about the development of sociology and anthropology in the Philippines. Anthropology in the Philippines. It started as a practical activity of colonizers in the services of Christianity in the Spanish government. Philippines was under Spanish colonial reign. During that time, Spanish coloners established site through theological or theodoxy, a value on writing history over the Philippines. Native traditions and oral traditions was undermined by colonization. Ethnographic, it is a knowledge was established as the basis integrations and indigenous elements into mainstream Philippine society. The Philippines is take its name from Philip II, who was king of Spain during the Spanish colonization of the islands in 16th century. So that the early cultures and society in the rediscovered archipelago, which was named Filipinas in honor of King Philip II of Spain. Henry Otley Beyer. He is the father of the Philippines anthropology, and he is the theorized that early Filipinos descended from waves of migrants, cavemen, Etas, who traveled through land bridge, and later Indonesians and Malays who reached the country by boat. 1914, Otley Beyer elevated an anthropology as an academic discipline at the University of the Philippines. He offered as one of the course in the Department of History and later on merged with sociology. The schools who has doctorate degree in the early years were first, University of San Carlos in Cebu, second, Ateneo de Manila University, third, Xavier University in Cagayan de Oro City. The next topic is sociology in the Philippines. Sociology in the Philippines, they have a three-stage and development of sociology in the Philippines. The stage where sociology was viewed as a social philosophy, when it was regarded as a problem or welfare-oriented, and when it finally geared more forward scientific orientation. Philippine Sociological Society was organized by a group of Filipino educators and visiting professors in the different regions. Their objectives are to increase knowledge about social behavior, second, to gather data on social problems for their possible solutions, third, to train teachers and researchers in the field of sociology, fourth, to develop cooperation and unity among social scientists in the Philippines. Fifth, 1960, the Researcher Foundations of Philippines Anthropology and Archaeology was established. Father Valentin Martin, he is the person who introduced sociology in the Philippines on 1896 as a course of criminology at the University of Santo Tomas. Serafin Macaraig. He is the first Filipino to receive a doctorate degree in sociology in 1939, and he is the author of first sociology textbook. There are four persons, sociologists after Macaraig. First is Juan Rios, offered course in social work in the University of the Philippines. Second, Professor Marcelo Tangco, succeed Dr. Macaraig. Third, Flora Diaz Katapusan, invented to teach sociology at the Centro Escolar University in 1946. Fourth, Dr. Beneficio Katapusan, invented to serve as a professional lectures in sociology at the University of the Philippines in 1948. Philippine Social Science Council. In 1968, it was formed to consolidate the Philippine social science resource. Sociology and Anthropology in the Philippines. In 1960s and 1970, researchers were undertaking along different aspects of social and cultural life. That's all, thank you.
Have you ever questioned yourself, or are you wondered why most of the individuals and societies are changing often? Basically, understanding society is extensive or important because if we are not trying to understand the social world or social system, we are likely to be overwhelmed by it. So my name is Jessa Hart Bagel, your reporter today. So let's start. What is sociology? Sociology is a scientific study of society, including patterns of social relationship, social interactions, and culture. Sociology has been derived from two words. The Latin socius means companion, and for the Greek ology means study of. So the term sociology was first used by Frenchman Auguste Comte. Sa madaling salita, sociology is the study of companionship, the process, development, origin of human society, as well as behavior itself. Moving on, so there are two subtopics that I will discuss. First is the turmoil of industrial revolution. In modern history, the process of change from agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. So the term to describe this phenomenon would be known as the Industrial Revolution, and it was popularized by the English economic historian Arnold Toynbee. This process was begun in Britain in 18th century. Undergirding the development of modern Europe between the 1780s and 1849 was an unprecedented economic transformation that embraced the first stages of the Great Industrial Revolution and the still more general expansion of commercial activity. So during the time of Arnold Toynbee's merong economic transformation na nangyari, in which the agricultural productions increased significantly on a large scale because of the new inventions. Major economic change was spurred by Europe's tremendous population growth during the late 18th century, extending well into the 19th century itself. So because of the industrial opportunities, people drew to the cities from the countrysides. So I have this data to present the increase of population in Britain when industrial revolutions emerged. So in the year 1750, 15% only of the population of Britain lived in towns. By 1850, over 50% of the entire population of Great Britain lived in either in town or a city. So by 1900, 25% of individual was added in the populations in town. So production expanded, leading by the end of 18th century to a first wave of consumerism as rural wage earners began to purchase new kind of commercially produced clothing, while urban middle class families began to indulge in new tastes, such as uplifting books and educational toys for children. An industrial revolution took shape, led by Britain, which retained leadership in industrialization well past the middle of the 19th century. In 1840, British steam engines were generating 620,000 horsepower out of European total of 860,000. So better metals and richer fuel also contributed to industrialization by creating the steam engine, an integral machines which powered the factories, locomotives, and ships. So yung mga new steam engines are used coal and iron, both in the construction and as fuel. So mag-increase yung demand for these resources. Technological change soon spilled over from manufacturing into other areas. Increased productions heightened demands on the transportation system to move raw materials and finished products. So because of the technological advancement sa Britain, marami ang nagbago, like canals, roads, or roadways. So in this case, they can allow goods to be sent for over a long distances. And with the help of the technology, mas mapabilis at maparami ang output na magagawa. Rural life changed less dramatically. Yes, there are also changes in industrial town, like with smoking factories that controlling skyline, the cities were overcrowded, dirty, and some instances there are strict rules and punishments. So factory tools spread widely even before this time, as sites replaced sickles for harvesting, allowing a substantial improvement in productivity. Larger estates, particularly in commercially minded Britain, began to introduce newer equipment, such as seed drills for planting, crop rotations involving the use of nitrogen fixing plants displaced the age-old practice of leaving some land fallow, while better seeds and livestock, and from the 1830s, chemical fertilizers improve yields as well. So rising agricultural productions and market specialization were central to the growth of cities and factories. So this explains why some areas such China in India did not begin their industrial revolution. Dahil siguro may mga factors na need to consider, such as finances, their current status, and other factors na they are not capable to do so until the 20th century. Unlike sa United States and Western Europe, by 19th century they began their second industrial revolutions, and we are aware that these countries are rich, so they need to improve their standard living because they have a lot of resources to produce. So, to sum up, Great Britain was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution and was the only mature industrial economy for a long time. The Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium, and United States are soon emulated Britain's industrial change. And by 1900, Britain would no longer be at the top. So with the United States as the world leading industrial nation in the 20th century. So for the next topic is the success of American and French Revolution. The American Revolution was an epic political and military struggle waged between 1756 and 1783, when Britain's North America colonies rejected its imperial rule. The protests began in opposition to taxes levied without colonial representation by the British monarchy and parliament. So as the political disagreement grew, they triggered a perpetual cycle of defiant acts and punitive laws that led to open rebellion. With the assistance of France, the American colonies were able to defeat the British, achieve independence, and form the United States of America. These are the events in American Revolution. In 1754 and 1776, prelude to independence. This is where the implementation of taxes. From 1754 until 1763, the British colonies and France fought an expensive land war on the North American continent known as the French and Indian War. To recoup these expenses and raise funds to replenish their coffers, the British government enacted a series of new taxes called Stamp Act of 1765. So this was the first tax imposed directly on the 13 American colonies. From that moment, Benjamin Franklin testified before Parliament that the tax was too high and that the colonies had already done more than enough to support the French and Indian War. And that same year, the group known as the Sons of Liberty was established. For the next event, the consequences of unrest. In 1767, Parliament imposed the Townshends Acts, which placed a duty on several essential goods including tea. The Liberty, a sloop owned by John Hancock, was seized on suspicion of smuggling. The growing unrest following this event led to the occupation of Boston by British troops in 1768. The tensions in Boston came to a head on March 5, 1770, as a mob gathered around a group of soldiers guarding the custom house. There are some uncontrollable protesters, and they start throwing some snowballs and other debris at the soldiers. So why na nangyayari yon? In the middle of chaos and without a direct order from the office, the soldiers fired back into the crowd, in which it led to killed 5 men and 6 wounded people, and that would be known as the Boston Massacre. So after, John Adams successfully defended his soldiers, but patriots like Samuel Adams and John's cousins used that event to garner support for the independence movement. So the next is no taxation without representation. The Tea Act was passed in 1773 to financially assist the struggling British East India Company or EIC by just placing a small tax on tea. So numerous colonies opposed on the said tax and continued to support James Otis Jr.'s position of taxation without representation is tyranny. So the EIC or East India Company secured passage of the tea via consignees in the American colonies. 7 ships were sent to the colonies carrying the cursed tea, while attempts in other cities were successful to send these ships back to England, and 3 ships landed in Boston. Over a 3-week period, many town meetings were held to discuss the volatile standoff between citizens and Governor Hutchinson. And on December 16, 1773, The final town meeting moved from Faneuil Hall to Old South Meeting House because of the overwhelming crowd size. Numerous speakers debated the issue, including Samuel Adams, and in some at the end of the meeting, they sensed no resolution, so the crowd headed to Griffin's Wharf, and the members of the Son of Liberties, disguised as Mohawk Indians, and they started climb aboard at the top of the ships and threw some 340 tea chests overboard. And this act of defiance later became known as the Boston Tea Party. So moving on, responses from all around. So the British responded against the Boston Tea Party by passing the Coercive Acts, also known as Intolerable Acts in the American colonies, because not everyone is agreed with Boston's actions, that causing the other colonies to rally in defense. So si Patrick Henry would give a speech in spring of 1774 in the Virginia House of Burgesses supporting the cause of freedom, which included the oft-quoted passage, "Give me liberty or give me death." The cause of independence was also championed in later writings such as Thomas Paine's 1776 pamphlet, Common Sense. So because of the rising tensions, the British monarch declared Massachusetts to be in rebellion and ordered the American patriots to be disarmed. A British unit marched from Boston Common to Lexington, Massachusetts, to apprehend rebel leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock, as well as their arsenal of guns and ammunition. So a prearranged signal of light from the steeple of the Old North Church, one if by land, two if by sea, that alerted Paul Revere and William Dowes to ride toward Lexington and Concord to spread the alarm that the British soldiers were on the way. However, Minutemen first engaged the British in open combat on April 19, 1775 on Lexington Green, where the shots heard around the world was fired. Prior to this skirmish, Captain John Parker uttered the phrase, "If they mean to have a war, let it begin here." By continuing the fight, 2 months later, colonies fortified Bunker Hill in Charlestown, and during the assault by British forces, the Continental Army soldiers were steadied with the order, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." A lack of communion forced the colonies to withdraw, and it was during the battle that Joseph Warren, the physician who sent Paul Revere on his ride, was just killed. And July 3, 1775, George Washington assumed leadership of the Continental Army on the Camp Bridge. So, cannons and fortification during Revolution. Several years later, British troops finally evacuated Boston, and Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen captured Fort Ticonderoga, with the large cannons were transported overland to emplacement on Dorchester Heights overlooking the city. And these cannons and fortification made it impossible to penetrate the city of Boston, so British forces withdrew. Before becoming a traitor, Arnold would also rally American troops to victory at the Battle of Saratoga, which encouraged Spain to join France in fighting against Britain. So for the next event of the American Revolution, in 1776 to 1778, the Defending Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, as war broke out, the governments of each colony formally declared their independence. And on June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee made a motion for independence before the Second Continental Congress. 4 days later, a committee was selected to write a document explaining the reasons for separating from Britain. And Congress voted to ratify the Declaration of Independence that was drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson and prominently signed by John Hancock on July 4, 1776. And the new country was called the United States of America. So, a drawing inspiration from prose, are wrote to inspire people how soldier and patriots fights, trying to sacrifice their souls, but indeed it is their responsibility to serve their country, and all he wants is to honor them, give thanks, and express a genuine love for both a man and women. Building alliances. So after that drawing inspiration from prose, the building alliances also happened. This is where Francis signed an alliance negotiated by Benjamin Franklin to help and aid the United States monetarily and militarily. So, Continental versus Loyalist. Early in the war, the British controlled Charleston and Savannah. They had hoped that a strong number of Loyalists in the South would rally around the Crown. Despite losing at the Battle of Camden, the Continental Army waged a successful guerrilla war against the British in Georgia and the Carolinas. Patriot victories at the battles of Kings Mountain and Cowpens, led by Nathaniel Greene and the Swamp Fox Francis Marion, kept Loyalists from joining British forces. So as a result, General Cornwallis was obliged to move north into North Carolina and then in Virginia, taking the fight to sea happened while Continental Army was fighting on land. The fledgling Continental Navy was engaged in fighting on the sea. Isa sa tumatak sa pangyayaring ito ay ang quote niya, "I have not yet begun to fight," when he asked to surrender his plundering vessels since they have a few ships. So for the last event in American Revolution, in 1780 to 1783, it was the final victory. It is where joining forces for one last attack. So the year 1781 was momentous for the American Revolution. The beginning of the year arguably witnessed perhaps the low point of American morality during the revolutions. The people are discontented, George Washington wrote to John Lawrence in early 1781. But it is with the feeble and oppressive mode of conducting the war, not the war itself. Indeed, Washington now believed that it was critical for the United States and its French allies to achieve a significant military victory in 1781, or all might be lost because of the state of American public opinion. Even so, Washington could not have foreseen the events that eventually unfolded during the year, nor could he appreciate their significance as they occurred. Indeed, most of the year continued to be characterized by inactivity of the French and most of the Continental armies. Only when the brilliant strategic activities of General Nathaniel Greene in North Carolina forced British General Cornwallis to march into Virginia did an opportunity open for Washington to achieve the military victory he had hoped for at the start of the year. So in Virginia, on the Yorktown Peninsula, Cornwallis found himself cornered by the combined forces of Washington's Continental Army and the French Army and French fleet. So these forces began siege operations against the British troops isolated at Yorktown. And on October 17, 1781, Cornwallis sought terms of surrender. So Washington worried that the victory at Yorktown might diminish Americans' continued commitment to the war. So the peace talk between the British and American diplomats got underway in Paris in May 1782. After 2 months of difficult negotiation, the British and US diplomats signed the preliminary articles of peace. That will be all. Thank you.